I still remember the freezing chill of the server room on Friday morning at precisely 7:15 when Julian Cross barged through the double-glass doors without knocking. I was sitting on a low steel stool near the primary database rack, wearing my favorite navy wool sweater, the one with a faint coffee stain on the right sleeve that my wife Hannah had been telling me to send to the dry cleaners for a month. My eyes were burning from staring at green terminal windows since 5:30 that morning. We had a high-priority enterprise client demonstrations scheduled for 11 o'clock, and one of the junior automated staging scripts had managed to lock half our transaction tables in Dallas. I had spent 2 agonizing hours tracking down the rogue database thread, line by line, ensuring our financial middleware pipeline remained operational. Apex Innovations, Inc. was an enterprise financial transaction middleware provider serving major regional banking clients across Illinois and Texas. I had joined the firm 11 years prior as a senior database administrator under the original founder, a brilliant software pioneer who believed in engineering's excellence, rigorous system testing, and treating technical staff with dignity. During those early growth years, we built a rock-solid reputation. Our systems processed millions of secure banking transactions daily without a single security breach or unhandled crash. We took pride in our craft, knowing that behind every line of code was a real person relying on our financial network. When private equity investors bought a controlling interest 4 years ago, the corporate culture shifted dramatically. Executive leadership brought in Julian Cross 18 months prior from an external management consulting firm. Julian possessed zero hands-on software development experience, but he excelled at corporate jargon, aggressive cost optimization presentations, and leveraging executive authority to squeeze extra hours out of technical teams. He viewed complex software engineering not as an intricate discipline requiring deep expertise, but as a fungible commodity that could be endlessly compressed to maximize quarterly profit margins. When he first arrived, Julian had promised to shield our department from corporate interference, but within months, as board pressure mounted, his promises evaporated into aggressive demands for unpaid overtime and unfeasible project deadlines. Julian did not ask how the system resolution was coming along on Friday morning. He did not even look at the glowing rack monitors or greet me. He simply walked over to the wooden work table where my notebook rested, tossed a thick crimson folder down like he was dealing cards at a casino, and uttered words that still echo in my memory. "Congratulations, Jason. You made the final survival cut," he said, his tone flat and completely detached as he stared down at his phone screen. The fluorescent lights overhead made the glossy paper look starkly clinical. It was a printed spreadsheet containing employee names, titles, and annual compensation figures. More than 30 names were highlighted in yellow marker across our division. Those highlighted names belonged to people I had worked alongside for over 11 years at Apex Innovations, Inc. These were not abstract line items on a balance sheet. They were senior engineers with mortgages, families, children in college, and elderly parents to support. People who possessed decades of technical expertise and who had built our core infrastructure from scratch. Effective immediately, Julian continued without looking up from his messaging screen. "We are reducing total departmental headcount by 35% to meet corporate operational goals. Moving forward, I need you to absorb Melanie Dawson's compliance framework duties, take over Brian Foster's cloud infrastructure deployment schedules, and handle Clara Montgomery's enterprise database reporting protocols." I sat motionless on the steel stool, my hands hovering over my mechanical keyboard as my brain digested his words. Melanie Dawson had spent 6 years perfecting our federal compliance mapping, ensuring every financial transaction complied strictly with regulatory mandates. Brian Foster had designed our entire secondary automated failover system, spending countless midnight hours during a severe Virginia hurricane in 2022, guaranteeing 99.99% system uptime. Clara Montgomery had managed 300 enterprise database instances across 4 international data centers with zero downtime over 5 years. Those were 3 distinct, highly specialized, full-time senior engineering roles requiring separate domain expertise. That is 3 complete full-time jobs on top of my own architecture workload, I said quietly. My voice sounded distant, stripped of emotion. Julian finally lowered his phone and locked eyes with me, his mouth twisted into a tight, impatient grimace, as if I were a slow pupil failing to grasp a simple arithmetic problem. Yes, he replied curtly, and you ought to be profoundly grateful. Half the engineers in this building are walking out today with 2 weeks' severance and a box of personal belongings. You get to keep your job, your health insurance, and your 49-year-old seniority status, so do not stand there arguing over resource allocation. Either you absorb the workload, or you can join them at the security desk before noon. I am 49 years old, and I have spent 23 years building enterprise infrastructure across this industry, 11 of those years right here at Apex Innovations. I understood corporate cost-cutting. I understood that quarterly earnings had fallen short, and that foreign investor pressure was mounting after our European expansion stalled. But asking one single professional engineer to work 80 hours a week, carrying 4 distinct critical roles, under threat of immediate termination, was not business strategy. It was reckless corporate exploitation disguised as executive decision-making. If you refuse to handle the workload transition, you can join Melanie, Brian, and Clara. At the front gate before noon, Julian added, gesturing dismissively toward the highlighted folder, I expect your signed acceptance of these updated duties on my desk by Monday morning at 9 sharp. Do not disappoint me, Jason. In this current economic market, nobody is irreplaceable. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the server room door propped open as cold, drafty air spilled into the aisle. I sat in that quiet server room for nearly 20 minutes, listening to the hum of cooling fans. Through the glass partition, I watched the chaotic scene unfolding in the main office bullpen. Security guards were quietly escorting terminated employees from their cubicles. People were packing cardboard boxes in near silence, while corporate representatives handed out severance envelopes. I saw Melanie Dawson holding a small desk plant, her face pale as she tried to maintain her composure. I saw Brian Foster shaking his head in disbelief near the elevators. These were the very individuals who had spent countless weekend hours resolving emergency outages alongside me. Around 2 o'clock that afternoon, I left my desk and walked out to the parking garage. A steady cold drizzle was falling across the city. I sat inside my sedan for a long time without turning on the engine, listening to the rain tap rhythmically against the windshield. The anger inside me had burned away, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. Julian Cross believed he held absolute leverage because I was 49 years old and had been with the firm for over a decade. He assumed I would quietly bow my head, accept impossible demands, and burn myself out to protect his executive bonus. He did not realize that 11 years of building enterprise architecture meant I knew where every structural foundation rested, where every legal vulnerability was buried, and precisely how fragile his corporate illusion really was. When I arrived home that evening, my wife Hannah was sitting in the kitchen reviewing lesson plans for her high school. She took one look at my wet coat and the expression on my face, set her pen down, and asked what had happened. I sat at the kitchen table and told her everything, from the surprise 35% staff liquidation to Julian's arrogant ultimatum. I explained how he demanded I absorb 3 specialized senior roles on top of my own architecture workload, threatening to end my career if I refused. Hannah listened intently without interrupting. We had been married for 22 years, meeting when I was a junior programmer and she was an assistant teacher. Together we had built a life grounded in practical financial discipline and mutual respect. When I finished explaining Julian's demands, Hannah reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. We spent 15 years paying off our home mortgage early, Hannah reminded me softly. Our children have completed college without student debt, and our emergency reserves are completely secure. You do not owe your health, your peace of mind, or your dignity to a man who views human beings as disposable spreadsheet entries. If you walk away today, we will be entirely fine. Her words provided the bedrock of confidence I needed. We opened our family financial binder right there at the kitchen table. We reviewed our liquid savings, our diversified investment portfolio, and our paid-off home deed. Realizing that we had complete financial independence removed every ounce of fear. On Saturday morning, Hannah and I took a long walk in our neighborhood park beneath the autumn trees. We reflected on our 22 years together, recalling how we had built our stability step by step through prudent financial choices. Hannah reminded me that staying true to ethical principles was the greatest lesson we could model for our children. I smiled at my wife, reached for my notepad, and told her that I was not merely going to walk away quietly. I was going to execute a precise legal and undeniable lesson in what true professional value meant. Over the remainder of Friday night and all of Saturday, I began analyzing the full scope of Apex Innovations' operational structure from my home study. Julian Cross had made several critical miscalculations in his desperate rush to cut expenses before the board's mid-year review. First, by terminating 42 employees in a single sudden action without 60 days written notification or equivalent pay, Apex had directly violated the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, commonly known as the Warren Act under Title 29, Section 2101 of the United States Code. That statutory oversight alone exposed the corporation to massive regulatory fines and back pay liabilities exceeding $1,200,000. Second, Julian had engaged in a severe breach of fiduciary duty by concealing ongoing system vulnerabilities from the board of directors. To make his quarterly operational metrics appear artificially stellar, he had repeatedly overridden my technical compliance warnings regarding database stability and unpatched security protocols. He had forced junior developers to bypass mandatory security audits, effectively falsifying internal compliance logs to present a clean record for an upcoming corporate merger evaluation valued at $4,500,000. Third, and most importantly, Julian had overlooked a fundamental intellectual property reality. 11 years prior, before joining Apex Innovations as an employee in 2015, I had personally authored and registered a proprietary automated database recovery and failover framework under my own private corporate entity. I held verified patent documentation registered under federal intellectual property laws under Title 17, Section 106. When I accepted my position at Apex, I granted the firm a non-exclusive, non-transferable license to utilize that specialized architecture, explicitly contingent upon strict compliance with professional workload standards and non-breach of master service agreements. That proprietary framework was the core digital backbone keeping Apex's primary enterprise clients online. Sitting at my desk late on Saturday night, I pulled out my original 2015 licensing contract. I carefully highlighted Section 4.2, which explicitly stated that any unilateral executive breach of workload integrity or material misrepresentation of system readiness rendered the software license instantly voidable upon written notice. This meant that the moment I issued my formal patent revocation notice, Apex would lose all legal authority to run my failover architecture, putting their upcoming $4,500,000 merger evaluation in extreme jeopardy. On Saturday afternoon, I called Melanie Dawson, Brian Foster, and Clara Montgomery individually. They were all sitting in their respective homes, still processing the shock of their sudden terminations. I invited them to my home for dinner, where we sat around the dining room table with fresh coffee and homemade apple pie. I laid out a comprehensive proposal. I told them that instead of competing against one another in a flooded job market, we were going to leverage our combined 11 years of institutional knowledge as a unified senior package. Each of my former teammates shared their initial panic after Friday's firing. Melanie had worried about her teenage son's upcoming college tuition. Brian had worried about maintaining his family's medical insurance. Clara had felt betrayed after giving 5 years of flawless service. As I explained my strategic plan, their anxious expressions transformed into bright smiles of hope and excitement. We sat around the table until midnight, refining technical profiles and outlining operational workflows that would showcase our collective strength to prospective employers. While Melanie, Brian, and Clara listened in amazement, I contacted Keith Henderson, the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Infrastructure at Vanguard Technologies. Vanguard was Apex's primary regional competitor, a firm known for maintaining high ethical standards, robust corporate governance, and excellent employee retention. Keith knew our work well. We had crossed paths at enterprise technology conferences for years. When I explained that Apex had just liquidated its top technical engineering talent and that all four of us were prepared to transition as a cohesive senior team, Keith did not hesitate. Keith immediately recognized the immense value of acquiring an established, highly synchronized team of senior engineers who could immediately manage enterprise client pipelines. He presented individual formal compensation packages offering each of us a 20% salary increase, full health coverage, flexible remote working arrangements, and substantial performance equity bonuses. For my role as senior managing architect, Keith offered $220,000 annually. By Sunday evening, Keith Henderson had delivered formal written employment offers to all four of us via encrypted digital signature. Melanie, Brian, Clara, and I reviewed and signed the contracts electronically sitting in my living room. We were scheduled to begin our new roles at Vanguard Technologies in 2 weeks. The relief and excitement in the room were palpable. We went from feeling discarded by an ungrateful employer to securing superior positions at an industry-leading firm within 48 hours. With our future secured, I spent Sunday night drafting 2 master documents in my home office. Document A was a formal, rigorous, 3-person workload impossibility analysis. It detailed the exact technical metrics, hour requirements, and compliance dependencies, proving that combining 4 senior engineering roles into a single position would guarantee catastrophic system failure within 30 days. I included detailed breakdown charts, showing that maintaining 300 database instances, running daily compliance audits, and managing cloud deployments required at least 120 hours of continuous labor per week. Document B was a 16-page forensic compliance audit. It meticulously documented every instance where Julian Cross had bypassed federal security regulations, altered compliance sign-off logs, ignored critical database corruption warnings, and violated statutory WARN Act provisions. On the cover page of Document B, I printed explicit legal declaration citing Title 29, Section 2101 for WARN Act violations and Title 17, Section 106 for federal patent infringement. I attached verified server timestamps, system error logs, and official internal correspondence proving that Julian had deliberately misled the board of directors regarding operational readiness in order to secure his executive performance bonus. On Monday morning at 8:15, I walked into Apex Innovations headquarters wearing a tailored charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase. The office atmosphere was heavy with tension. Remaining employees walked with their heads down, terrified of further cuts. Empty cubicles stood like ghost towns across the floor. I walked into the employee break room where several junior developers were standing in anxious silence near the espresso machine. I greeted them warmly, reassuring them that their hard work was valued and that better opportunities existed in the industry. At 8:30, I walked straight to Julian's office. He was not at his desk yet. He rarely arrived before 9 in the morning. I placed a printed copy of Document A neatly in the center of his executive leather chair. At precisely 8:45 a.m., sitting at my desk, I composed an email containing Document B. I addressed it directly to the chairman of the board of directors, the chief legal counsel, and the lead external financial auditor of Apex Innovations. I attached all supporting evidence files, audit trail logs, and legal patent declarations, then pressed send. At 9:09, I heard Julian Cross stride into the building, speaking loudly into his wireless earpiece about quarterly operational efficiency gains. A moment later, he entered his private office, spotted the paper on his chair, and read the first paragraph. Within 30 seconds, he stormed out of his office, his face flushed crimson and his eyes wide with fury. He marched straight over to my workspace, slamming his fist onto the divider partition. "What is the meaning of this childish stunt, Jason?" he shouted, loud enough for every employee in the open bullpen to hear. Everyone stopped working and looked up. Remaining junior developers peeked over their screens in stunned silence. I remained seated, calmly took a sip of my coffee, and looked him directly in the eye. That document is a formal technical assessment of the workload you ordered me to absorb. On Friday, I replied in a clear, resonant voice that carried across the entire floor. It outlines why combining 4 specialized senior engineering roles into one position is physically impossible and technically irresponsible. Julian leaned over my desk, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "Get into my office right now before I terminate you on the spot for insubordination," he snarled. I stood up, smoothed my suit jacket, picked up my briefcase, and walked into his office. He slammed the door behind us so hard the glass pane rattled. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my department?" Julian raged, pacing behind his desk. "You are an employee here, Jason. You do what you are told or your career in this city is over. I will personally see to it that no enterprise firm ever hires you again." I waited patiently for him to finish his outburst. Then I reached into my briefcase, pulled out 2 pristine white envelopes and laid them gently on his desk. "The envelope on the left is my formal resignation notice. Effective immediately," I said calmly. "And the envelope on the right is a copy of the comprehensive audit report that the chairman of the board, the chief legal counsel, and our external auditors received at 8:45 this morning." Julian froze. The anger on his face flickered, replaced by a sudden wave of uncertainty. He snatched the right-hand envelope, tore it open, and began scanning the pages. As his eyes moved down the detailed documentation of his forged compliance logs, unpatched database vulnerabilities, and statutory Warren Act violations, the color slowly drained from his face until he looked completely pale. "This is confidential internal data," he stammered, his voice trembling slightly. "You cannot distribute this to the board. This is corporate sabotage. Everything in that report is factual, verified by system timestamps, and documented under my professional duties as senior enterprise architect," I replied calmly. "Furthermore, you should be aware that Melanie Dawson, Brian Foster, Clara Montgomery, and I have all accepted senior leadership positions at Vanguard Technologies. We begin in 2 weeks." Julian dropped the pages onto his desk, staring at me in complete disbelief. "You lured my entire core technical staff to our biggest competitor," he whispered. "They are free citizens who were terminated without cause." On Friday, I reminded him. "But there is one final technical detail you need to understand, Julian. The automated database failover framework that powers Apex's enterprise client architecture is owned under a registered patent by my private entity, licensed to Apex on a non-exclusive basis under Title 17, Section 106. That license explicitly revokes automatically upon executive breach of operational compliance standards. As of 5 o'clock this afternoon, Apex's right to utilize that framework expires." Julian collapsed into his executive chair, his hands shaking as the full magnitude of his predicament settled in. Without that framework, and without the 4 engineers who knew how to maintain it, Apex's system would be completely incapable of passing the upcoming merger audit. The board would be forced to pay millions in emergency consulting fees or face immediate breach of contract claims from their largest clients. "Is there any amount of money that would convince you to stay and resolve this?" Julian asked, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogance. "I can offer you a vice president title, a $40,000 retention bonus, and a 50% salary increase right now." I looked at Julian Cross, a man who had traded integrity, empathy, and professional ethics for short-term corporate vanity. "No, Julian," I said softly. "Some things in life are far more valuable than a corporate title or a discretionary bonus. Respect, integrity, and standing by the people who build the work will always mean more." I turned, opened his office door, and walked out into the bullpen. As I walked past the rows of cubicles toward the main elevators, several remaining colleagues looked up with quiet admiration. I turned in my security badge and laptop at the HR desk to Administrative Officer Brenda, walked out into the crisp morning air, and took a deep breath of fresh air. That evening, I met Melanie, Brian, and Clara at a quiet steakhouse downtown to celebrate our new beginning. As we sat around the table sharing appetizers and laughing about the morning's events, Melanie raised her glass for a toast. "To standing up for ourselves," she said, her eyes shining. "To knowing our worth and refusing to be broken." We clinked our glasses together, feeling a deep sense of camaraderie and satisfaction. The fallout at Apex Innovations over the next 6 months was swift and uncompromising. Upon reviewing Document B, the board of directors immediately launched an independent forensic investigation led by external legal auditors. They discovered that Julian had deliberately falsified operational metrics for over 18 months to conceal systemic infrastructure vulnerabilities. To avoid a catastrophic enterprise collapse during the merger evaluation, Apex was forced to hire Vanguard Technologies as an emergency external infrastructure consultant at 3 times our standard corporate rates. Julian Cross was stripped of his executive authority and terminated by the board for cause 3 months later, losing all accrued stock options and facing potential civil litigation for breach of fiduciary duty. The corporation was also forced to settle with all 42 laid-off employees, paying out full Warren Act statutory compensation penalties and extended health benefits, exceeding $1,200,000. At Vanguard Technologies, our transition was exceptionally smooth. Keith Henderson welcomed our team on our first official day with top-tier hardware, generous onboarding stipends, and complete operational freedom. Keith gave our team total autonomy to design a modern, resilient enterprise infrastructure. During our second week, Vanguard assigned our team the core architecture migration for a major regional financial client. We designed an automated deployment pipeline that cut system latency by 30% while maintaining pristine security compliance. Melanie, Brian, Clara, and I built an engineering department grounded in mutual respect, transparent communication, and sustainable work practices. Within a year, over 40% of Apex's former enterprise clients migrated their accounts to Vanguard, citing our team's proven track record of stability and ethical leadership. Our new work environment at Vanguard was the exact opposite of the toxic culture Julian had cultivated at Apex. We prioritized workload balance, encouraged ongoing professional development, and established a mentorship program to guide young engineers entering the field. We ensured that no single engineer was ever expected to carry an unsustainable burden. When complex outages occurred, we assembled as a team to solve the problem systematically rather than pointing fingers or casting blame. 18 months after that fateful Friday morning, I was sitting in an airport executive lounge in Chicago, waiting for a flight home from an enterprise tech summit. As I stood up to grab a bottle of water, I spotted a familiar figure sitting alone near the window. It was Julian Cross. He looked markedly different. His hair had grayed significantly at the temples. He was wearing a simple casual jacket instead of his usual custom-tailored suit, and he looked tired. When he turned and noticed me, there was a momentary freeze in his expression. I saw no malice or anger in his eyes, only a quiet, reflective humility. He stood up, walked over, and nodded respectfully. "Hello, Jason," he said quietly. "Hello, Julian," I replied, offering a calm handshake. "How have you been?" Julian took a deep breath and gestured toward his laptop. "I have been running a small independent consulting firm for 6 months now, helping mid-sized tech startups set up proper compliance governance, trying to help founders avoid making the catastrophic executive mistakes I made." I looked at him and nodded gently. "That sounds like meaningful work, Julian." He looked down at his coffee cup, then back up at me. "I think about that Monday morning in my office almost every day, Jason," he admitted softly. "I lost my perspective, my integrity, and my respect for the people who actually did the work. You taught me a hard lesson, but it was a lesson I desperately needed to learn. I am truly sorry for how I treated you and the team." Hearing those words from a former executive who had once declared nobody was irreplaceable felt like the final closing of a long chapter. I appreciated his honesty and told him that I accepted his apology without reservation, wishing him genuine success in his new venture. As I boarded my flight back home to Hannah, I reflected on everything that had transpired since that cold Friday morning in the server room. My adult children, now forging their own professional paths, had watched their father take a principled stand against corporate bullying. Knowing that I had modeled integrity for them was the greatest reward of all. Many people view revenge as an act of anger or destruction, a desire to pull someone down. But true revenge, the kind that satisfies the soul and builds a lasting legacy, is never about destruction. It is about creation. It is about standing firm in your integrity, protecting your colleagues, and building something far better from the ashes of a toxic environment. At 49 years old, I learned that your worth is never defined by a corporate executive's upsprite or an arrogant ultimatum. Your true value lies in your expertise, your character, and your willingness to say no when dignity demands it. To every professional out there facing impossible demands or toxic corporate leadership, remember this. You are never powerless. Your experience matters, and sometimes the most victorious thing you can do is stand up, turn the page, and walk forward into a better future.